Уважаеми колеги, позволете ми да открия церемонията по удостояването на професор Алън Грийр с почетното звание доктор хонорис кауза на Софийския университет св. Климент Охридски. Ще ви запозная с част от неговите постижения, кратка биография в най-спестения вид. Професор Алън Грийр е ръководител на Института по физични науки, обединява няколко факултета в Кембриджския университет. Професор е по материалознание от 2001 година, а от 2004 до 2007 е бил заместник управител на колежа Синди Съсекс, Кембридж. От 2006 година до 2011 е бил ръководител на борда на инженерния факултет към университета в Кембридж. Бил е гост-професор в Националния политехнически институт и гостуващ учен в Център нуклеар в Гренобъл, Франция. Кларк Харисън, изтъкнат гостуващ професор по физика, Център за иновации на материали, Университет Вашингтон, Сент Луис, гост-професор в Факултета по физика на Виенския университет и също така в Факултета по химия в Университета в Торино, Италия. Получавал е голям брой награди, аз няма да изреждам всички, някои от тях. Още 1981 година, като сравнително млад изследовател, е получил наградата Голдшмидт на колежа Чърчил в Кембридж. 1983-та IBM награда, малко по-късно Захариазен награда на Journal of Non-Crystalline Solids, присъдена на млад учен за принос чрез публикации. Също така 98-ма Light Metal награда на Обществото за минерали, метали и материали. 99-та също така получава награда в САЩ за Cast Shop Technology. 2000-та година Пиклинга награда в университета в Кембридж, награда на Международния симпозиум за метастабилни и нанокристални материали. През 2006-та награда Хюм Родери, Института по материали, минерали и добивна индустрия в Обединеното кралство. 2009 година Грифит медал и награда за Института по също така материали, минерали и добивна индустрия. Избран е за член на Института в същата област, материалознание. Получава дипломи за научни публикации от ректора на Технологичния университет в Краков, Полша. Дрезден. 2018 година е получил Джон Грифитс медал на Института по материали за изключителен принос в науката и технологията на получаването на метални сплави. Научните интереси на професор Грийр са в областта на термодинамично неравновесните нестабилни материали на метална основа, най-кратко казано метални стъкла. Обхваща както тяхната структура, термодинамични свойства, механични свойства. В областта на зародишообразуването и на кондензирани системи също има съществен принос и в тази област той сътрудничи с български учени от Института по физико-химия още през 80-те години. Той познава добре работата на професор Кащиев, на професор Гуцов, работил е с тях. Ефекти на електромиграция в сплави, а също област, която той има съществен принос, взаимна дифузия в многослойни системи, фазови преходи, метални сплави. Професионалната дейност на професор Грийр, редактор е на Philosophical Magazine от 2003 до сега, Philosophical Magazine A, вече не е, но е бил дълъг период от време, член на консултативния съвет на Materials Research Society Communications от 2012 и в момента е член на редколегията на Proceedings of the Royal Society of Chemistry в Лондон и е председател на редакционния съвет на Materials Research Society Bulletin, член на редколегията на Science Acta Metallurgica and Materialia и е главен редактор на Journal of Materials Research. Административен ръководител е на Института по физични науки, както отбелязах, съставен от 8 департамента. Това са приложна математика и теоретична физика, астрономия, химия, науки за земята, география, материалознание и металургия, физика, чиста математика и математическа статистика. С общ персонал 1500 души, преподаватели и администратори, от които 300 са преподавателите. Автор е на 2 книги, 13 редактирани сборници на конференции, 15 глави на книги, 500 публикации, H-индекс 62 по Web of Science и има повече от 20 000 цитати, около 1500 цитати годишно. И извън написаното, бих искал да кажа, че професор Грийр беше основният учен от университета в Кембридж, който подпомогна осъществяването на един наш проект по програмата Хоризонт 2020, в програмата Twinning, 3-годишен проект. Немалко наши млади колеги, не само млади, посетиха Кембриджския университет, създадоха се научни сътрудничества, имаме общи научни проекти, някои от тях очакваме да бъдат успешни. Има и такива, които не се класираха, но те бяха също плод на съвместна работа. Сътрудничество с професор Грийр, неговият департамент, както и с Кембриджския университет, продължава. И аз се радвам, че имам тази чест да, като декан на факултета, да бъда част от колегите, предложили професор Грийр за удостояване с званието доктор хонорис кауза. Така че сега ще дам думата на господин заместник ректора, на професор Витанов, да връчи на професор Грийр точното звание, което е свързано и с документ, освен с знаци. Професор Витанов,
Universitas literarum serdicensis, nomine sancti Clementis Archidensis, ex sententia facultatis chemiae and farmatiae, virum eminentissimum atque referendissimum, professorem doctorem Alън Грийр, doctorem honoris causa, scientiarum chemicarum universitatis serdicensis, nominavit atque declaravit, in eiusque rei fidem hoc diploma sigillo, maiore universitatis roboratum e consuetis, subscriptionibus munitum ei dandum curavit, datum serdice ante diem quartum nonas decembres, anno domini bis millesimo undevicesimo, rector universitatis. Висше училище в Срядци, наречено е именем присноблажанного учителя българского Климента Охридского. Увядав все художество химического и цялбанного учение, еже съвършила еста професора Алън Грийр. С честион глашаете го басано почетного доктора Висшего училища Климента Охридского. В Срядци месенца декемвря второго валято 700 е пента сотное и 28 от сътворение миру. Professor Greier, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Vice Rector, and thank you very much everyone in the audience for being here. I must say it's a tremendous honor and a privilege to receive this recognition from the University of Sofia, and a tremendous pleasure to be here with so many friends. The topic of my talk is the glassy state of matter and how we can extend its range. But I thought I should first say a little something about Cambridge-Bulgarian connections and the fact that there's a rather active Bulgarian student society in Cambridge. You can see that they have been doing some cultural mixing and they have discovered the English culture of the pub quiz, where they can test their knowledge of Bulgarian history and culture, and in intense competition, 2 teams, 1 winner, but each one gets a prize, which is a very nice outcome from this contest. Perhaps more of interest in the academic setting than even the pub quiz is the joint publications between our 2 institutions, the University of Cambridge and the University of Sofia. This chart gives you a sense of the dramatic rise in the number of citations to those joint publications over recent years. The little dip at the end is, of course, because that final number is not for a full year. So I fully expect that the number continues to climb, and we look forward to further cooperation in the future. Now, of course, the business of making glasses is ancient. This is a picture from the Middle Ages, but I was reminded visiting our archaeological museum here in Sofia of much more ancient glass even than the ones you see on the slide. A very ancient business indeed, producing objects that are in some degree useful and objects that can be highly decorative. But we should remember that in the modern age, the glass is a highly technological material produced with great precision, for example in these optical fibers, which of course the essence is they must transmit information along the fiber, so you must have a material without internal interfaces. And the ultimate material without an internal interface, you might argue, is the liquid, and that's where the glass comes from. So in this chart, we see top right, a liquid in equilibrium at high temperature. We cool it, going to the left. The liquid might freeze into a crystal, but if it avoids doing that, it will become more and more viscous and form a glass. And that glass is the focus of our attention, and this chart already gives us a hint of the complexity of this system, in that there's not a single glass. It will depend how fast we cool the liquid, exactly which state we get. Now, that previous chart didn't say anything about the chemistry of the system, and we can make glasses out of oxides. That would be our traditional glassware. We can, of course, make them out of polymers, and all the other items on our list here. Notable on that list, the idea that you could make glasses out of carbohydrates, out of alloys, and I'm going to focus on some of these in this talk. I'm going to start with metallic glasses, a prime feature of my own research and a very good prime feature of the Cambridge-Sofia link. So we'll first of all consider that to take a liquid like water with a low viscosity, the simple crystal structure when it freezes will be very difficult to make into a glass. It will usually crystallize. And that is true of metals and alloys also. But if we adjust the composition correctly, and you can look down to the bottom of the slide and see this iron-boron composition, you can reduce the critical cooling rate to make a glass to a still quite high number, 10 to the 6 Kelvin per second, but a number which is reachable experimentally. And that iron 80, boron 20 composition was one in which both Toni Spasov and I were working in the late 1980s and have maintained common interests ever since. So we were busy reading each other's papers back then. And we were having to use rather extreme methods of production, such as this. Since that period over 30 years ago, the field has, of course, moved on. And we have learnt that with choosing rather more complicated compositions, such as you can see written in the figure here, cooling rate necessary to make the glass can be reduced dramatically. In fact, it can be reduced to roughly the same level as you would need to make an oxide glass. So in other words, it becomes extremely easy. Because you do not need to extract the heat fast, you can have a thicker cross-section of material up to several centimeters. This gives you a little example from a group at Caltech of a nickel-based metallic glass with the diameter of an American dime. And larger objects than that can be made. What should we say about these glasses? Well, we could start first by thinking of their structure. It is by definition not crystalline, it's preserving something of the liquid, and this very subject of looking at the structure of liquids was made respectable by J.D. Bernal in Cambridge and London, and here he is with his first model, what he called dense random packing model. You might think that that is in some way disordered, and it's certainly not crystalline, but its entropy turns out to be almost the same as the crystal, so it's not really a disordered state, but it is a non-crystalline state. And the properties are, of course, the reason for interest. So in the general world of materials, you could think of something as being very hard and brittle, or alternatively, soft and tough. What you'd really like, of course, is both together, and that's precisely the difficult thing to achieve. You get one or the other. If you were able to get both together, that would be up towards the top right of this chart. And the amazing thing is that it is a metallic glass, and now there are several known, which occupies the position that is furthest towards the top right in comparison with all other materials. So it is in fact the world beater. And so you can understand why, with such a rather unusual combination, literally better than anything else, people are interested in these materials. And they combine those very good mechanical properties at room temperature with the ability, of course, to head back towards the liquid state on heating. This shows just a fun example where that transition temperature going from glass to liquid is below the boiling point of water. So in warm water, the glass will soften and therefore, of course, can be shaped. Partly, it could be shaped in a way that we would be familiar with from traditional glasses. As I always say, don't expect to see these at your duty-free shop anytime soon, but it is just a demonstration of possibility that you could do a forming operation with a metallic material which mimics what you would do with an oxide glass. And this is possible with the metallic glass in a way that it wouldn't be possible, of course, with a crystalline normal metal. But much more likely for real applications is something on the micro scale where you get fine components or fine surface patterning with very great precision. Now, I mentioned already that you could get a range of glassy states by cooling the liquid at different rates. You could also take a given glass and then do treatments after solidification. These could involve heating, so-called annealing, or plastic deformation, or other types of deformation, or irradiation. And in such a way, you could raise the energy of the glass. That's the process called rejuvenation, or you could lower the energy, a process called relaxation. And we should think a little bit about why those might be of interest. The first thing to say is that the blue lines on this diagram are calculated from an actual glassy system and measurements on it, and they are attempting to give us some sense of the range of energies you could trap into what would be thought of as a given material, a glass of a given composition. And on the far left-hand axis at the bottom, you can see quite a range between the bottom blue line and the top blue line. That energy range is the heat of melting. So the astounding thing is that a set of glassy structures, which you might have thought were really just one structure, can have a range of energy that is as big as the energy difference between the crystal and the liquid. And if you were to go to low energy ends of that range, you could get some interesting properties, which I've put in the gray at the top here, but I've emphasized at the bottom going in the opposite direction to increase the energy. And the reason I've emphasized rejuvenation and increased energy is that gives us access potentially to even better mechanical properties. and fights against some of the problem of brittleness that these materials can show. So let's think about how you could do the rejuvenation. The telephone kiosk shows characteristic of what you might think of as ordinary glasses. They are brittle. Metallic glass would not behave like that. It can be deformed, as shown in the diagram bottom left, very substantially deformed. And that allows us to think of the deformation itself as a method for treating the glass, something you could never do with the conventional material. One way you could treat the glass is to roll it into sheet at room temperature, so-called cold rolling. That takes some energy to do. Some of that energy is stored in the material. And it turns out about 4% of the work you do is stored in the material. And that's the same number as you would get for a crystalline metal. That's interesting, but actually highly disappointing, because one had hoped that by deforming a non-crystalline material, we would store more energy. And the reason to hope that was lessons from polymers, where some 30 to 60% of the work you do is stored as extra energy in the material. So worldwide, there has been an effort to try to increase the degree of rejuvenation in metallic glasses. And in that work, it has been helpful that a wide variety of deformation techniques, shown in the box here, can be applied. So you could try ever more extreme rolling, as in sketch A, where the thickness of the sheet is reduced by 92%. It's quite extreme. Just below that in figure C is a torsional device for applying very large strains to the material. Indeed, unlimited strains, really. And that is therefore a technique of particular interest because of the unbounded strain that could be applied. And our chart top right here shows the increase in energy with the number of rotations in that torsional device. It may be starting to saturate, but in any case, the energy that's measured there as an increase in the material is some 2 kilojoules per mole. That's about a quarter of the heat of melting. That's a good start in storing a lot more energy in the system. In our own work, we've taken a different approach of rather low strains, of compressing a notched cylinder. The region outlined in yellow shows the degree of compression achieved, and that is a very small strain, but under a hydrostatic pressure. And we can cut out that little disc in the middle of the notched cylinder, analyze the stored energy in it, and we look at that. It's well over 3 kilojoules per mole, in other words, more than 40% of the heat of melting. So we've gone up even higher. Now, in some ways, it's not so surprising that with relatively extreme plastic methods like this, you could store a lot of energy. Let's just look at, however, what that means for the nature of the glass you have made. Our bulk glass was cooled at about 100 degrees per second. By deforming it in the way we just showed, we can increase its energy such that if you were to have made it by cooling the liquid, you would have had to cool the liquid at 10 to the 10 degrees per second, some 8 orders of magnitude faster. So you have this remarkable thing of a glass that thinks it was cooled at 10 to the 10 degrees per second, but actually has a bulk structure and mass way beyond the dimensions you could achieve for anything that you could actually cool at 10 to the 10 degrees per second. So it's a good sign of what the processing can do to get a different material. But there may be yet other more surprising ways of changing the structure of the glass. Here we see a two-dimensional glass, just to illustrate that it is, of course, by being non-crystalline, it is non-uniform. There are regions of lower density and regions of higher density. So if you were to elastically strain that, some parts will naturally strain more than others. In other words, the strains will be non-affine. Similarly, if you were to change the temperature of this glass, you would see on heating thermal expansion, but locally the expansion cannot be uniform. It must expand locally in some places more than others. And so there is an interest then in changing the temperature of the glass, cycling from one temperature to another, to see what that does to the structure. This is a compilation of experiments done cycling between room temperature and liquid nitrogen temperature with a variety of glasses in a variety of configurations. We need not really worry about the details, but the interesting thing is, as shown in these calorimetric results, you store energy in the system, and the energy you store is comparable with what you would achieve by plastic deformation. Yet you would have thought, in a classical and elastic thermal expansion mode, that this type of treatment would have no effect on the material. In fact, it has quite a strong effect. And work by Robert Mass in Illinois has tried to pin down just where this energy is stored. He's identified a relaxation peak at 177 Kelvin, and he can cycle through that. And with this elastic processing in that range, he can store, as shown as the top red line on this chart, nearly 60% of the heat of melting in the material. So it is quite astounding that so much energy can be stored from a process that simply shouldn't be storing any energy. It should be purely in an elastic regime. So interesting things shown by the glasses. And in the end, why would you be interested in storing so much energy? It might be to do with the properties you have. There's a variety of good effects you might have, but they include the mechanical properties, and that's shown by the length of these curves. You want them to be as long as possible to show the greatest plasticity. And the key point in this chart is to show that you can have a rapid termination of that curve if the material is brittle. That's what you would get if you anneal the glass, which is a bad outcome, at least for the mechanical properties. It might be good for other properties, such as their soft magnetism. But having made it undesirably brittle, what this cycling technique shows is that you can reverse time. You can bring it back from the dead. You can actually make it unbrittle again by cycling it, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. So as I like to think, I'm thinking of all those Roman buildings and baths, no doubt, in Bulgaria, where the Romans were plunging themselves into hot water and cold water. This thermal cycling was probably not such a bad idea for the health of the Romans, or indeed the health of our metallic glasses. I'll say something quickly about two other families. Carbohydrate glasses have a rather important role in preserving life on Earth. And in the broadest possible way, there are two main challenges to life on Earth. One is dehydration, seen, of course, by desert plants, but also in animals. Lost an animal here. I was going to show you a nice worm. In any case, you can preserve the plant through periods of desiccation, as it turns out, by glass formation. Now, the metallurgists in the room will be familiar with phase diagrams like this that show a eutectic, so the lowest freezing point is somewhere in the middle. This, however, is a diagram not between two metals, but between water and sugar, in this case, sucrose. And the way we were making glasses for the metals was to start with a good composition and cool it. We then crossed a critical boundary, the glass transition curve, and made the glass. But for a carbohydrate water system, sugar water, you don't have to cross the line that way. You could stay at the same temperature and dehydrate. So you would go to a lower sugar content, you'd move to the right, cross the glassy line, and set into a solid. And that forming of the glassy solid, rather than the forming of crystals, is critical to the preservation of life, because the formation of a glass occurs uniformly through the system and doesn't tear apart the cellular structures. Here's our worm, which can also survive as the desert plant can. Salt pool in which this lives could dry out when the sun shines. This little animal will go completely glassy and hard and brittle, but if you hit it with a hammer, it will no doubt break into many little pieces. But if you rehydrate it, it comes back to life quite happily. Even more clever, however, is this frog, which illustrates the other main challenge to life on Earth, which is freezing to death. And the frog made a very bad life choice for a cold-blooded animal. It decided it would live north of the Arctic Circle, which means in the winter it will freeze. There are biological mechanisms for avoiding freezing, but they only work for a couple of degrees or so. So those mechanisms will simply not work for the frog. So it has to be more clever. And in fact, it again uses glass formation. When it freezes in the winter, it's completely solid. All its systems shut down. By volume, about half of it is ice, and half of it is a hard sugar glass. It achieves this by control of nucleation, which reminds me to say that of all the science in this area of liquids, glasses, crystals, transitions between them, the work on nucleation of crystals is critical, and it was actually the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences that did so much critical work in that area. So what the frog does is arrange to have a nucleus, a template for ice, sitting in the fluid outside the cell, so that when the frog starts to get cold, the ice forms never inside the cells, but only outside. The ice is pure H2O, so the fluid outside the cell becomes more concentrated in salts. That upsets the osmotic balance with the cell, which pulls water out of the cell, which dehydrates the cell. Dehydration would normally be a bad thing, but just as for the desert plant, the frog has a solution, which is to put in sugars so that that liquid inside the cell is glass forming, not crystallizing, and it thereby forms the glass, preserves the biological structures, and can hop back to life in the spring. And my final topic is chalcogenides, based on elements such as tellurium and selenium. You will have been using these for a long time in what is now a slightly dated technology of optical discs for computers, DVDs, and so on. In this case, the glass and the crystal switch easily to and fro, but they have somewhat different electronic states. The glass is a bit more semiconducting, crystal a bit more metallic, and that difference in electrical behavior can, of course, be detected and used as a memory technology. This rather complicated chart just shows you some of the elements and alloys involved. They involve at the corners of the triangle germanium, some elements behaving similarly, tellurium and antimony. And there are two main families there illustrated by the acronyms in the yellow boxes. So this is for optical discs. The area of optical discs remains active as a research area, but the current interest is to achieve the switching differently. In the optical disc, the switching between glass and crystal, to and fro, is done by laser heating. The little colored box, bottom left, shows a vertical orange rectangle, which is a little cylinder, which is you pass a current through and is a heater. And on top, you can detect a dome in 3 dimensions. It would be like the cap of a mushroom, a champignon de Paris, and that is the bit that gets switched. So the process is quite straightforward. The original material is crystalline. You use the heater, you put a current through it, it heats that little mushroom cap, takes it over the melting point, so you then have a liquid locally, in a very tiny volume, of course, very much submicron. That tiny volume surrounded by cold material is then cooled extremely fast, about 10 to the 9 degrees per second, and forms a glass. If you put a lower current through the heater, you simply warm the glass and it crystallizes. So you can take the material to and fro. And the rate of crystallization is absolutely critical. And this gets back to some of the early studies of Toni Spasov and myself on crystallization of metallic glasses, where we were interested in the rate. So you need the switching to be fast when you want to switch, when you're writing the data in your memory. But you need it to be very slow when you want to keep your data. You don't want to write your data in, let's say, a memory stick and come back next week and find that it's erased itself. So the rate difference as a function of temperature is critical. It is, I should tell you, a viable technology on the marketplace in mobile phones, and this is principally aimed on this slide at a memory technology, but people are interested in going much further than just memory. And the reason is this, that on the left you can see a 2-state system, it's either on the upper line or the lower line. That's the resistance of the high resistance of the glass, the low resistance of the crystal. But why do you have to be one or the other? You could be part way between, and that's what's shown on the right-hand side, with some 16 steps between being all crystalline or all glassy. And that idea of multiple steps would completely change the way you would think about computing. You'd no longer do it in terms of ones and zeros. You would have 16 things to play with. So it would be quite a breakthrough for the entire system of computation. And the other interesting thing is the idea of having multiple intermediate states that build on each other is just analogous in a way to the synapses in our own brain, where you get signals traveling along from one to the other, and you accumulate signals and then send a signal on when you have a sufficient accumulation. Now, we're a long way off being in any way able to replicate the absolutely stunning performance of the human brain, which achieves so much memory and power with such tiny power consumption. But this idea of synapses and linking it to memory and learning is something that the chalcogenine systems can in some tiny way mimic. And this is how it would be. You can see the resistance of a chalcogenide cell on the left, plotted as a function of the number of pulses, and you eventually switch from one state to the other. But the essence of the idea is that the system is itself, without any programming, doing addition. It knows how many pulses it's already had, it remembers that, so it either switches or not, depending on how many it has already had. And there are multiple publications emerging on this as a way forward for computing at present. Our own work in the area was focusing on the crystallization rates. This is a graph. In the broadest sense, the only thing I want to point out from this graph is the curvature. It's not a straight line. Whereas the traditional view of crystallization of a glass would be that you'd have a simple Boltzmann behavior explaining how the rate changes with temperature. And if that was true, then this graph would show you a straight line, which obviously it doesn't. And it seems that the curvature is absolutely characteristic of liquids forming glasses. This shows a series of curves. One of them is straight for silica, SiO2. Others become increasingly curved. And they're all glass-forming systems, and it's telling us about the temperature dependence of the viscosity. Well, it's at the most curved end of the scale that you would find the chalcogenides. And the curvature, quite important in what I was mentioning earlier about needing both, in some circumstance, fast crystallization, and in a different circumstance, slow crystallization. And that range with temperature is most relevant for our applications in terms of what it means for the crystal growth rate. So here we have plots of crystal growth rate as a function of temperature, normalized to the melting temperature. So on the right-hand edge is the melting temperature, and to the right of that, you obviously don't get crystal growth because the liquid is stable. To the left, you do get crystal growth, and the rates go through a maximum. And bottom right are the classic oxide glasses, normal glass objects and windows. In the middle, you've got some pharmaceutical and organic systems. You eventually reach the blue copper zirconium line that represents a metallic glass. Then you get the red dashed line that represents our computer switching chalcogenide, so-called GST. Very fast, high up on this scale of temperature growth rate, of crystal growth rate. So the point is, the chalcogenide system, when it wants to, can crystallize very fast indeed, and that's critical for the speed of the computer application. And then beyond it, right at the top of the chart, are molecular dynamics simulations, not experiments, on pure metals, in this case silver. And it brings us to a question I perhaps raised right at the beginning of the talk. If we can make alloys and make glass forming easier, could we go backwards, go back towards a pure metal and still get a glass? And for years, it was considered that this was most likely that this was impossible. And that even if you did make a pure metal glass by some magic technique, it would not be stable at room temperature. And then we found out that actually you can make pure metal glasses. Admittedly, only in some metals so far, like these polycentric cubic metals, typically tantalum. And the condition is really extreme, 10 to the 14 Kelvin per second cooling, realized, however, in quite a simple way, by bringing together nanotips inside a microscope Passing a current through, the tips melt, they form a liquid bridge of nanometer dimensions, and that liquid bridge is, of course, cooled extremely fast. You can see in the pictures on the right the microscopy of the material, and that the glassy portion in the middle can grow or shrink depending on the heat treatments you apply, which you do by passing a current through. So you could think of maybe moving towards an even faster switching and therefore higher performance computer memory. And this has so far been demonstrated with just one element, namely antimony, where the idea of having a single element glass switching to and fro with the crystalline state has now been demonstrated. This memory doesn't yet work at room temperature, so you're not going to find it in your everyday laptop anytime soon, but it's a way forward, I think, for how we could still move to greater performance for these memory and computing systems. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say, that a sort of theme of the talk has been building bridges. Bridges, of course, are a big thing in Cambridge. You can see some of them there. And the name of the town, of course, is from the bridge over the River Cam. The bridges in the talk are between different classes of glass made on metals, carbohydrates, chalcogenides, and many other classes also, with many parallels in their behavior from system to system. Parallels that are quite unusual to draw in other categories of material. And of course, bridges between different nations and different universities, where I know from our collaborations here are extremely, extremely fruitful. So thank you again for the distinction of the degree, and thank you for listening, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Здравие же и спасение, и во всем благое поспешение. Подашь, Господи, благочестивому и православному болгарскому народу, и сохрани его